My name is Curtis Mann, along with my partner Dominic Amici. We are the owners of End Results Health and Wellness. End Results is a medical fitness facility. Now, how does that set us apart from other facilities? Is we focus on health. So we work with people that have various types of medical conditions, from cancer to heart disease to fibromyalgia, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis. But we also work with the healthy population who wants to prevent disease. So we focus on health when everybody else focuses on fitness. We interface with a number of doctors here in the South Bay, including the City of Hope from Duarte, and incidentally, the City of Hope opened up a new hospital here in Torrance. And so we are health. And we have a slogan: we make healthy happen. This evening, we have a wonderful lecture about CBDs and all the wonderful properties of CBDs and how it helps in healing from different types of ailments and different types of diseases. Dr. Wagner is going to do the presentation. So without further ado, you don't want to hear a whole lot from me. Dr. Wagner.
So we're going to try and work hard to get the videos to sync up. Right now, I brought some slides and they're only up here, and hopefully in a few minutes they'll appear here as well, for those of you that are in the back. Curtis, thanks a lot for working with us and the invitation to come down. This is the second type of meeting I've had like this in the last 48 hours. So on Tuesday afternoon, I was in New Orleans, where a very large healthcare network has about 50,000 employees, the largest healthcare network in Louisiana, is moving forward with CBD in all of its health and fitness centers in the state. And they're looking at bringing more information, not only to the individuals, the customers, but also to their medical staff. So we had a group of MDs as well as a group of people running the wellness centers there as a part of that. So again, it's a real pleasure to be here. I will qualify myself in that I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a geneticist. Long time ago, and everybody can look around the room. I don't have to, not talking to my daughter here, but talking to people that are my age. A long time ago, I had the honor of working with and earning my PhD with one of the founders of understanding the genetics of cancer. And he ended up becoming the director of the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, and in 2001 shared the Nobel Prize in Medicine for the discovery of the genes that are most critical to control when you're trying to deal with cancer. So I started my career in the genetics of health, and over time have moved into other areas, and am very excited with what we're seeing now in the community with regard to CBD and to medicinal cannabis, and also became acutely aware with my colleagues that it's a field that is full of mystery, and in particular is full of mystery for the people who most want to understand it from its real medicinal purposes. So if you look around the room again, I don't think you see a big recreational marijuana group here. You see people here who are thinking about health and wellness, and you fit exactly in that demographic. And I think I've got in one of my slides here. If I don't, I'll tell you the number. Survey done in 2018, 78% of Americans over the age of 35 we'd like to be able to use CBD products or medicinal marijuana to help with some of their health-related conditions, some of their wellness conditions, but they really don't know where to start. Okay? And so what I hope to do today is give you a little bit of information on why these compounds from cannabis are effective, how they work in your body. Some of the slides I have are a little probably too complex, so if this is informal, you just stop and say, I really don't know what that orange circle on that slide means. Can you tell me more about it? And then in the end, I want to tell you about what our company is doing to help people know where to start in the process of using CBD or medicinal cannabis. So that's the goal, is to give you a bit of a background, some information to start with, and then get into a little bit of the science behind why these compounds are so effective in humans, and then tell you a little bit about what we're doing to try and help people know where they should start the process. So I'm going to walk back and forth a little bit here to be able to, I'm somebody who likes to be more with the audience than behind the table. Sorry about that. So
it is up on the screen here now too.
It is on the screen here. We weren't able to get it all the way to the back screen. Apologies for that, but I'll try and walk through each slide. So a little bit of background to what I just addressed for you. What's the problem? What's the concern? What's the issue that we're trying to address? It turns out that in 2016, HelloMD did a study. This is just as medicinal cannabis was becoming more and more known and used in the country. And what they found was that in addition to the study I told you more recently that 76% of Americans over 35 would like to be able to use it, what they found was that half, 48% of those interested in using medicinal cannabis didn't know where to start. How much should they take? And they would end up spending about $3,000, and it could take them 6 months to find the right dose. So if you're going to walk into a dispensary, or if you're going to buy product, which they have here, which is really good, and you're going to take it home, you want to know, well, how much of this should I take? And the science of this is really accelerating now, but it's still in its infancy. And so how can we bring a tool to the consumer, to the person who's looking to take care of themselves, to help them understand where they should start? That's where a company that we've started, which is called Greenway DNA. We believe we've brought a solution for people to know where to start based on the science of how cannabis and cannabis products work. And because marijuana, let me back up for a minute. Cannabis is actually the name of a family. And there are many types of cannabis plants and species within that family. And marijuana is one of those. And because marijuana was labeled a Schedule I felony to possess it, people wouldn't be able to use that. There wasn't much research done here in the US, but a tremendous amount of work done in Israel and in other countries to help us understand the science behind this. What you're also hearing a lot about right now is hemp, okay? And hemp is also a cannabis, but hemp is different in the composition of the compounds that it has, slightly different than marijuana. So what we're really trying to do is bring to individuals both a method for determining how much CBD or medicinal cannabis they should take each day, but also to try and educate you through sessions like this right here. So the solution that we see is that if we can use a personalized DNA test, where each of you would take a DNA test to understand how your genes determine how you respond to CBD or CBD and THC, we can use that to help make a recommended dosage for you to begin with. So instead of having that problem of not knowing where to start, of having that problem of spending thousands of dollars and months of time trying to figure it out, you know where to start. And I'll tell you an anecdotal story that I couldn't have done just 72 hours ago, but in this room in New Orleans, in the hospital with the doctors there, the question came up, why don't we just do what we do with almost all of our medications? Let's start at a low dose, and let's see how they respond, and let's sort of work our way up. And the conversation turned to, you know, there's a better way. We understand enough about how our own genetics determines how we perceive and process these compounds from cannabis, that we don't have to start at the lowest dose and try and see if it works. And if it doesn't work after a month, come back and try a higher dose, et cetera. We can actually give you information to help avoid that trial and error. So what we do is we use basically a state-of-the-art DNA sequencing method to look at approximately 20 genes. The human genome, we each have about 30,000 different genes. We look at 20 of those, and we look at a number of variants for each gene, and that tells us how fast you perceive CBD. That tells us how you process it in your cells and how it affects you and can affect your metabolism for different conditions. So before I go too much further into that part of it, I wanted to talk a little bit about why CBD, THC, and other cannabinoids are really so effective in our system. We all have our 30,000 plus or minus genes. We all have slightly different variations in our genes, and I'll come to those variations in a little bit. But those genes, some of those genes also encode, they code for a set of proteins in our cells, which make up what's called the endocannabinoid system, okay, or ECS. That's a natural part of our physiology. Has nothing to do with cannabis, has nothing to do with what we call phyto for plants, cannabis-derived cannabinoids. It has to do with compounds that our body naturally makes, largely from fatty acids, largely from lipids that we take. And those compounds then are processed and they work in our own body to help regulate our metabolism and help us respond differently to different conditions. The types of conditions that the endocannabinoid system, our own endocannabinoid system, regardless of cannabis, forget about cannabis for a minute, okay? This is just your own body, your own, how you respond to nutrition, what you eat, how you exercise, etc. The endocannabinoid system regulates those conditions shown on the right-hand side of this slide. Sleep, appetite, mood, your motor control, pain, memory, how you regulate your body's temperature, what we call homeostasis. That system, those cellular systems and processes are there in all of us. We each have it a little bit different because of the genes that we have, the variants that we have of those genes. We each respond slightly differently. But it's that system that then interacts also with the cannabinoids, like CBD, from the plant. So it's like many of the drugs that we have, many of the pharmaceutical compounds that we take are actually either derived directly from or based synthetically on compounds found in nature. So these compounds from cannabis, CBD, THC, they're compounds that also interact with our own internal system. And that whole area is just now being mined, and in fact the FDA just approved for the very first time last year a new drug from cannabis for treating epilepsy. Okay? So these are all compounds that occur naturally, but they interact with this endocannabinoid system that we have. There are two main compounds found in cannabis plants that are often confused with one another and how they have an effect on our endocannabinoid system. One of these, which is shown at the top, is THC. That is a psychoactive compound. That's what people will want to get in their system if they're looking to get a high. That's what we experimented with, some of us anyway, when we were younger. But there's a whole host of those compounds in the plant. There's not just THC. There are close to 100 different cannabinoid related compounds in the plant. And one of those that we've discovered that is very prevalent in the plant and has really great beneficial health implications for us is called cannabidiol, or CBD. CBD is not psychoactive. It interacts with our endocannabinoid system in a completely different way, and it interacts actually, as I'll show you in a slide in a few minutes, with many of the pathways that other pharmaceutical drugs that we're used to taking and we know about interact. And so keep that in the back of your mind. CBD interacts with a part of the endocannabinoid system that's quite different with how THC works. That's what's led to this sort of revolution in the world of hemp. So hemp is a type of cannabis that has, in general, all these products have to be certified, but in general has less than 0.3% THC. Any product that has less than 0.3% THC has no psychoactive activity. And that's why those products that are CBD products alone, with less than 0.3% THC, can be sold here. They can be sold at the grocery store. I have a small farm, and we go buy hay and horse feed and stuff, and they started to sell it in the farmer's store there too. So you can buy CBD everywhere. So that's really opened up the door for people to be able to get the health benefits of cannabis without having to go down the psychoactive route. Now, I want to make a really important comment here. CBD in its own right is probably the most important cannabinoid compound from cannabis. But in many cases, small amounts of THC also are really beneficial. And that's where knowing how you respond, how your genes allow you to respond, can allow you to decide, do you want to have just a CBD product, and how much of that should you have? Do you want to try and find a product that has some THC in it? And you can get very low amounts of THC that wouldn't be psychoactive, but still would help you with some of the conditions. And we tend to find that more in pain than we do anywhere else. But again, it's very individual. The physician I was with 2 days ago kept repeating to the physicians at the hospital saying, it's an N equals 1. N is like the number of people in your sample. Everybody's different is what she was trying to tell them. The physicians kept wanting to generalize. Let's think about this. How does everybody fit into this? What dose? What have you learned? What dose can you recommend based on all the information you have so far? And we kept having to say, every individual is different. And why not take advantage of the knowledge we can get from your DNA to help you get what you need individually? So this is the main components of the cannabinoids that we know of and how they act now in cannabis, THC and CBD. CBD is not psychoactive, THC is. Low amounts of THC, though, won't be psychoactive, and for some people, based on your genetics, even higher amounts of THC won't be that psychoactive. How does this work, and why are these two compounds responding so differently? So remember, I told you that all the cells in our body have the proteins that make up the endocannabinoid system. Okay? What's represented in this slide is a human body with different colors on it that represent where in the body a type of protein we call a receptor is largely located. And my best analogy for a receptor is to baseball. And come on, this is LA and the Dodgers are going to win the World Series. Right? But imagine you're the catcher, okay? And the pitcher's out there with the ball, and they're going to either throw a fastball, a curveball, whatever. Depending on where they throw that ball, you have to move the mitt to be able to get it. So the catcher's mitt is the receptor. And the signal coming in is the baseball, okay? And depending on how they throw that baseball, it will be curved, it'll be fast, it'll be high or be low. So different cells in your body make different catcher's mitts to catch different signals coming in, a fastball or a curveball. Okay. So what you see here is that two of the major receptors in the endocannabinoid system, which are called CB1 and CB2. One of the things that scientists aren't really well known for is creative naming. But it's for cannabinoid, right, 1 and 2. Those two receptors, and the color's probably a little hard to see, but they're more orangeish and reddish. Those are the receptors for THC. And they're largely located in the brain, and they're largely located in the central nervous system. Now there's a whole host of other receptors, and because we're showing this off of not a slide, it's not going to show up on that screen, but it'll show up here. There are a whole host of other receptors that are these different colors that I'm going to talk about in a minute, those catcher's mitts that catch CBD. Okay? So how your body responds to THC and how it responds to CBD is based on those catcher's mitts and the different cells, and you can see that the CBD receptors tend to be throughout the body, much more than localized in the nervous system, and therefore that helps with a lot of those conditions that we talked about earlier with pain, anxiety, with digestion. To get now overly complicated, but I'll try and keep it simple, if we look at those receptors that catch CBD, and that's kind of what's shown here. Pretend the little arrow like this is the catcher's mitt, and you can see the circle is the CBD molecule from the cannabis. So catcher's mitt's catching CBD. What you'll see is that those receptors are the serotonin receptor, the vanillinoid receptor for pain, and opioid receptors, and dopamine receptors. Things that are naturally part of the chemistry that your body processes anyway. One of the big potential home runs for cannabis in the future is really locked around that fact that CBD interacts with your opioid receptors, and yet is not addictive the way that opioids have become. And so there's a lot of work right now looking at CBD for pain relief as a substitute for the use of typical opioids. So the point of this slide is that there's a whole bunch of receptors, whole bunch of catcher's mitts, and those catcher's mitts are specific for CBD. So that's why CBD can work separately from THC and how it affects your body. And the types of conditions that CBD can help regulate when that catcher's mitt catches it ranges from anxiety and depression to pain to, we know there's an impact in cancer-related pain from this, to blood pressure, etc. So it's a whole host of different symptoms that CBD can help you with. And the reason it can do that is what's shown on this slide. CBD interacts with those different receptors that then trigger the pathway for pain or anxiety, those sorts of nervous systems and those cellular responses. Those are all like separate highways. It's like trying to decide you get on I got on the 405 to come to the 107. Should I have gone the other way from Google Maps or not? These are this whole network of pathways in your cell. And each one of those has a different trigger, a different catcher's mitt or receptor, and CBD can interact with each one of those. So that's what's really unique about CBD and how it affects you. Now this next slide, I'm going to take you one step even deeper. Okay. you've got the catcher's mitt, you've caught the CBD. How does that make a difference in how you feel? Well, it turns out that when the catcher mitt catches the CBD, it ends up communicating with other parts of the cellular system that you have. Okay? It sends what we call a signal. So it knows it's got the ball, now it's got to decide what to do with the ball. Do I throw to second? Do I throw to first? Do I tag the runner because I dropped it and they're going to try and run to first? I'm sorry, I'm getting too much. I like baseball now. So you receive it in the catcher's mitt, and then what that does is that triggers other things to happen in your cells. We call that signal transduction. Okay? That signal transduction then changes your physiology, changes your nervous system, your feeling, your state of feeling pain. It will help relieve your pain because it's making those changes in your cell. Some of these, and here I'm sorry, it's kind of cut off at the bottom, but some of these are what we call antagonistic, so they slow the process down. Some of them actually accelerate that, and they make it go faster.
In the previous chart, you had something under PAR receptors, Alzheimer's. Is that, was I reading correctly?
You're reading
Because I can't
correctly.
read quite from this distance.
Yeah.
One more.
So that's these guys in here have to go back a slide.
Yeah, but there it is over there.
You
in
can
the
see it
middle.
up here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of research, and some of the work that we're doing is targeted toward looking at Alzheimer's, at Parkinson's disease. One of our co-founders' mother has Parkinson's disease, and they could not find a way to help quell some of the symptoms that she had and not have her get nauseous after she was taking the prescribed medication. Moving into a CBD regimen solved that problem, and we tell that story on our website. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
But it's listed on there for Alzheimer's as well. Can you talk like 30 seconds about the benefits towards Alzheimer's?
There's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of research happening. There's anecdotal evidence that shows that it will help with Alzheimer's and slow down that process.
Wow.
But it's still, again, being worked on. And one of the limitations we have is, again, until January 1st, 2019, even hemp, which has less than 0.3% THC, is not psychoactive, was illegal in the US. So the 2019 Farm Bill made the cultivation of hemp legal for the first time federally. And we're still hampered with the fact that cannabis, marijuana, is only legal on a state-by-state basis. It's still federally illegal. So the research that is happening here in the US is really been slowed down by that. We're heavily dependent on research that's come out of universities in Israel, in Canada, and Australia to help us do that, but each of those populations is smaller. They don't have the horsepower that we have in the US in our medical system. So yes, there are good indications from that Alzheimer will be positively helped or enhanced with this, but we're not there yet.
Thank you.
What does that say? I can't see it.
I'm sorry, the
Inhibitors.
Oh,
the red?
yeah.
The red means it inhibits that particular receptor. So again, sometimes when the catcher's mitt gets the CBD, it has to communicate, just like I had a question, right? So you start to have that signal and it says, okay, I now need to do something different. And so it will either activate some of your cellular process, or it can actually inhibit some of those. And so through that particular receptor, which has to do with blood pressure, high blood pressure, it helps inhibit that and helps with blood pressure. So, great questions. And that was really the point of this slide here, which is that downstream pathway. There's one other piece that you need to understand, and then I'll be done with the science, I think. Although I find it really fascinating, I'll talk about it all night. So you get the CBD in your catcher's mitt. Okay, you now know I've caught the ball. I need to go and tell my cell to do something different. The next piece of this is how long in your cellular, how long in your system, and how long in your body does the CBD or THC or any compound persist. And what happens is we have a set of enzymes. My most popular use of enzymes, the biggest use of enzymes in the world is in our laundry detergent. We all know those ads, they really are. They're proteins that degrade things, and we use them to degrade chlorophyll or stains or fats. If we spill some steak sauce on our shirt or something, right? You can put your laundry detergent in there, the enzyme will degrade it. Well, our cells have enzymes that degrade these. So the question is, how long in your system do these compounds persist? So we have the receptor, we have the signal transduction. How long do we keep that whole system activated is dependent upon the activity of our metabolic enzymes. How fast do we degrade these compounds? With regard to THC, which is the psychoactive component, some people in this room, I guarantee you, have a very, very slow rate of degradation of THC. And so you might take just a little bit of THC and feel euphoric for hours, and another person in this room has a very fast rate of degradation of THC, and they might be like 5 minutes later, nothing's happening, right? So what we need to think about in all this is receiving, signaling, and degradation.
Does that change with long-term use?
Does that change with long-time use? No.
No. So
That's a really good question.
However you process it is how you would over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years.
Yeah.
It's no different.
Yeah, so the beauty of, to simplify genetics as best I can, the beauty of it is we're all born with what we got, right? And so very little of that changes in our life. We're learning that there's a whole field called epigenetics, that as we age, our genes change a little bit. But in this case, that's really not a major component. And so if you're a high metabolizer, and your cells degrade THC really quickly or CBD really quickly, then you're going to need more of that to be able to get the effect that you want. And that was the way you were born, and that's the way you are today. Okay?
And that would show up in your personalized DNA test?
And that would show up in your personalized DNA test. So because for each one of these proteins we've talked about, the receptor, the signal transduction protein, the metabolic enzymes, they're encoded by a gene, and those genes have been sequenced, and those sequences have been looked at for each of us, all the variations that we know to date, and we know how active they are based on those variations. So that shows up in the DNA test. And just as I promised, I was getting out of the science a lot. Now I'm going to get to the DNA. Apologies for that. So basically what I've told you is the biology of CBD is complex because it interacts with so many different parts of our cellular physiology. Okay? So each individual has unique proteins encoded by their DNA that receive the catcher's mitt, process the signal, and metabolize CBD and THC signals. Okay? These unique genetic differences in those many genes that are there are a phenomena we call single nucleotide polymorphism. Okay? So, or a SNP. Basically, DNA is 4 bases. I have Naomi Franklin, actually, before Watson and Crick to thank for that, so we need to give Naomi a lot of credit because she didn't get the recognition she needed. We have 4 bases. We have an A for adenine, T for thymine, G for guanine, C for cytosine. And those 4 bases make up the double helix that we've all seen, and there's an image of the double helix here. Well, it turns out that at any one position in a gene, I might have an A, an adenine, but you might have a G, and you might have a T. Just a single little change out of the billions of DNA sequence that you have, that little change can change how the protein works. Because the protein comes from the DNA. The protein is encoded by the DNA. So just that one little change can change how active your enzyme is. It can make an enzyme hyperactive or really slow. It can make a receptor really good at seeing things that catch transmit or really not so good. And this whole process of these what we call SNPs, or this diversity, is really now helping us to define what we call personalized medicine. Okay, so in this slide it tells you that of the 3 million, about 1% of your genome is variation due to SNPs. That means there's about 3 million across our genome, and basically what these can do, if we see that it's not GC but it's something else there, is that it can help us predict the side effects of drugs. It can help us understand if there are potential interactions with drugs that are different than we might expect. And the final thing is it can help us estimate the doses of drugs that we need. Now it's really fairly straightforward today to determine the sequence of your particular genes. And that has to do with a revolution that started about 20 years ago and has now moved to the point where everybody knows that there are these various ancestry companies out there. There's Ancestry.com, there's 23andMe. And the way they determine your ancestry is they look at these SNPs. And they know that certain SNPs come from Finland and certain SNPs come from Samoa, and they can sort of look at that and say, this is where your DNA originated from. It's just based on the inheritance generation to generation. What we're doing is we're saying, let's look at those genes in the endocannabinoid system and the variations of those genes that have been used in clinical trial studies where patients have been asked to participate and be tested for their response to different cannabinoids, to serotonin, to melatonin, to opioids. And we know the genetic variation of that patient, and we know how they respond. Okay? So what we're doing is we're not doing ancestry. We can do ancestry if somebody wants ancestry, but we're not doing ancestry. We're really focused on the endocannabinoid system, those key genes and the variations, so that we can tell you how you're likely to respond. And so that's the next slide here, and where we're headed with this is that in talking with Curtis and looking at the opportunities that you might have and what we're doing in trying to educate by these sorts of conversations, is to help bring to consumers the information they need to begin to use CBD in the right way. And so what we do is we have, it's a really simple, it's just like a 23andMe or Ancestry.com or whoever you may have done personally. It's just a little kit. You just spit in this tube, seal the tube, send it off, we sequence it, and we give you back a report. And I'll show you a little bit about what's in that report, just to inform you a little bit more about what we know about the genes of the endocannabinoid system. Okay? So, as I've said, I just demonstrated better with the box probably than with this slide. This is how it works. People order one of these, you open up the tube, you spit in the tube, you send it back, and we send you a report. And my 87-year-old mother, who was suffering in the hospital after surgery on, she had a partial glucoceptomy 2 years ago due to tongue cancer, and was in a lot of pain from that recovering. I got her to spit in this tube.
Yeah.
She's about this big and weighs 85 pounds now, but she's still going. And she was saying, you know, I've got to try and do something about this pain, and she was really tired of all the medication she was taking, and she had a really bad relapse with an infection that she got when she was in the hospital and had to go back to the hospital, and so we use this to help find that right dosage of CBD for her. She lives in Pennsylvania. It's a state that does have legal medicinal marijuana. She didn't want to have anything to do with THC, but we found the right dose very quickly for her of CBD to help with the pain that she was experiencing that was really ongoing for her. So whether you're 85 pounds and 87 years old, I guess I never thought about that, her age is almost her weight now. Or you're younger, then this is something that you can do easily. Now the beauty is, when we make your DNA, we can get you those results back for the genes we're testing now, but then we can also continually test that as new information comes forward, because your DNA is available to do those other tests. And again, people who have perhaps done a 23andMe or Ancestry, you get update reports in the future when something new happens. So as the science of cannabis evolves, as the science of cannabis and health evolves, as we find out more genes and variants and how they interact, we can continually provide that information to you. What's the report look like? The report that we give you is pretty extensive, and I just took a couple snapshots here to give you a sense of this. It has several parts to it, and the first part is just really high level. We try and look at some conditions that are very common for the use of CBD or CBD and THC, such as pain, anxiety, and insomnia. We actually recommend a starting dose for you. And in many cases, we recommend no THC. That's pretty common. And you can see even from this, the amount of THC that's recommended is very, very low relative to CBD for these conditions for this particular patient. So we try and give you a summary right up front so that you can, and it's actually a little card if you want to cut it out and take it with you. And you can say, look I want something that has this. Now it's really important that you get product that's been tested. All products should list their composition in terms of CBD and THC in them. But this would be something where you could go and talk to somebody or look through products and say, does this have what I want for what I'm trying to address?
But isn't there's no real regulations for CBD?
It's not regulated by FDA right now. There's some discussion that it might be regulated in the future a little bit, like some sort of supplement or like folic acid. It's actually a really good question, and it was a big, again, with this healthcare center and group in Louisiana, they had their attorney in the room with us. Interestingly, even though in Louisiana medicinal marijuana is legal, this system with tens of thousands of employees has made the decision they will not promote medicinal marijuana, but they will start to promote CBD. That's a legal decision. It's legal to do it, but they decided they didn't want to do it because medicinal marijuana is still illegal federally. But the way they were looking at this is that they would be very comfortable taking it into their system almost like a supplement. And they expect, I think people expect that CBD will ultimately be regulated a little bit like a supplement, but right now it's not regulated. And so that's where it's important, again, that if you're buying a product, you look at the label, you look at you understand that it's been certified by a lab that's been tested that says that this is the actual amount of CBD that's in there.
What if you take a lot of different medications? Would the CBD interfere with that?
That's another good question, and one of the things that we do as a part of this, so the short answer to your question is it's not clear, okay? And there's now a lot of research going on with that, and at this point the best thing to do is to begin to gather that information. So part of what we do when you take your test is we give you a personal survey where we ask that question. And so we and others are starting to gather that information on what medications are people taking and what are their responses to having CBD. So at this point, we assume that there may be some competition because the CBD is interacting with some of those same receptors if you're taking some sort of opioid and you're taking CBD. But there's not enough information yet to definitively say what type of interaction there is.
Grapefruit.
Right?
Grapefruit.
Like grapefruit, yeah.
If your medication shouldn't be taken with grapefruit,
right.
You should not be using CBDs.
Type of
The
thing.
same pathway is what I understand.
Yeah, no, that one I haven't heard. So I don't know of any data but maybe you do, that there's an interaction there between that. So yeah, part of this is to get that information, to have everybody take a survey and then help us build that as we go forward. The second part of your report actually tells you this is impossible to read, but they tell you the genes. So this individual had variations in 4 of the genes we tested. One of these was a receptor, the HTR1A, and this variant, the variant in that receptor increases the activity of the receptor and may increase your propensity for anxiety or depression, and decreases your responsiveness to CBD. So here, part of the recommendation that's made is for anxiety and depression to have us start with a higher level of CBD and see how that goes. So that's the receptor. They also had a variant in some of the signal transduction genes. And then the last one, MGLL, is actually related to fatty acid metabolism. And that's an interesting story in its own right. We had a mother of a 15-year-old girl who was really having bad digestive problems. They found that CBD helped with that. And then for some reason the CBD stopped working, so they took the test, her daughter took the test. And what she found was that she had this variant in the MGLL, which was causing her inability to digest and process certain fatty acids. So not only did we figure out what a good dose of CBD was for her and got her back on track, but it also informed the mother that maybe she needs to be careful, a little more careful about the diet issues there too. And her, this 15-year-old had been in and out of the physicians for a long time, and they had never run a genetic test to see that. The next part of the report is just sort of some background. This is an overview of the science behind the report, so we try and explain to you all the things we just did here. What is a SNP? What are receptors, etc. So you get to read that over again. And then what we do is we tell you about the variants that have been detected in your test at a high level. And then for each one of the variants, we actually give you a lot of detail behind that. So we actually provide you with the scientific references in the literature that show that that variant is linked to that particular condition and processing of CBD. We describe what that gene does. This is for the HTR1A. It's also known as the serotonin receptor. And so there's a little bit of explanation here, but also some references. So our recommendation is you take this to your physician and you talk to your physician about it as well. And with the background that's given here, if your physician isn't familiar with these genes or this, they should be able to find these references very quickly and help you understand that even more. So we give you sort of a high-level overview. We go a little bit deeper into what that means, and then we actually give you the exact variant you have, plus the references in the medical literature as to why that variant is something to consider in the recommendation that's made. So this is there's a whole field around pharmacology, which is known as pharmacogenomics. In 2018, it was about a $12 billion industry in the US, and it's companies testing your genetics for your potential response to different drugs and drug interaction, et cetera. And what we're doing is sort of taking that same concept of pharmacogenomics and turning it into a similar sort of approach for the use of CBD, THC, and medicinal cannabis. So the science behind the approach is there, and it's already well established in the medical profession. And now what we're trying to do is take that into this new area.
I didn't catch exactly what you said we ought to go and talk with our physicians about.
Yeah, so basically what we recommend is that you take your report and you talk with your physician about what that means for you. So back to the story of this 15-year-old, okay? For some reason, even though she had been having digestive issues for years, and she had been she's from Portland, Oregon, been in and out of Oregon Health Sciences University, one of the top 5 medical research universities in terms of grant funding anyway. Really, really good. They never ran a genetic test. So the sort of insights you can get from this information could be much deeper than you would get from our report. And our recommendation is that you would take that and you would talk with your physician about it as well. Try and get that personalized medicine discussion going based on the information you get from this. And you know, other companies, so 23andMe they started in Ancestry. Now they do Ancestry plus Health. They test for about, I think they now test for about 11 different health conditions. And they would make the same recommendation. I mean, you need to have that understanding of your physician when you get to this level of detail.
Have you, in your experience, or anybody you've talked to, found that some doctors or in some states may not want to talk about any of this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because she's going through cancer treatment, and one of the questions was to our oncologist, what do you think about using CBD or whatever? And the response was real quick. It's not federally legal, therefore we don't even get into that discussion.
So you need to, you know, so now I'm off the record.
Okay, great.
So you can stop filming.
You don't hear this?
I have a lot of
Plug your ears.
empathy and personal sympathy. So while I've been remarried, my ex-wife and the mother of my 2 children, and I'm gonna get emotional, died a month ago today of brain cancer. And you know, I come from a background, again, my PhD was with a person by the name of Lee Hartwell, shared the Nobel Prize in Medicine for the genetics of cancer in 2001. Anybody can look up Lee's record, and you can look up my contribution to that work. I know enough to be dangerous, is what I told each physician, including the oncologist, including the radiation oncologist. And I said, you know, she's in a lot of pain. She's in a lot of pain, and this is really concerning me, and I think there are other ways to try and treat this. And I won't name the doctors by name. I mean, everybody's good people. Nobody's trying to be malicious here. But it took a while to be able to just convince them that adding this to her treatment, and I think she had, you know, 12 or more different medications. She was taking anti-seizure, et cetera, as she went through treatment, and said, you know, we've got to try this. And it was getting her with some CBD when we finally got her home that made a difference. Now, you know, her prognosis was, we knew the end result for her, right? It was pretty advanced brain cancer. But the butting up against this in the hospital system was really tough. Yeah. And I ended up, I'm a pretty persistent guy, and this is part of a big healthcare system in the state of Oregon. And so I ended up calling the CEO's office. I talked to the executive assistant of the CEO. I wanted to talk to the chief operating officer. Eventually, I had a meeting with the head nurse of the whole facility, the hospital facility. And who showed up at that meeting? But somebody from the corporate office. So it was only after pushing them and saying, you know, look, we need to do something different here, that we were able to say, we'll add that as part of the course. They said, you do it, you administer it. We'll acknowledge that you're doing it. This was while she was in the hospital. But it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
So I would say, you know, listen to your physicians, but this is such a new and exploding field right now. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and there are a lot of people who are out there making some money without the right science behind it, without the right quality behind it, et cetera. So it's one where I can see and understand where a physician might be a little skeptical. There's not a ton of qualified studies done in the US. In fact, I was just on a conference call with a Canadian group, so it's all legal nationally in Canada. There's a company that has, I think, close to 30,000 enrolled clients and patients in the program that they've been running for years. And we're going to start to run this through that system as well with them in Canada now, because they see the real need for that. So the data is still coming out. My off-the-record recommendation is be pushy, look at the alternatives, find a different physician to talk to who will be willing to talk about it. Don't ignore your primary physician, because hopefully they know enough about your current, been going to them over and over. You need to listen to what they're saying, but also see if there isn't an alternative there as well.
Thank you.
Did it help her with pain?
It really helped her with pain. So one of the things about pain that's pretty interesting, I learned from this, is it's really what you perceive. And her cancer had spread to her brainstem, was fairly diffuse, and she would get pain symptoms that she was feeling, but there wasn't any physiological thing wrong with her. It was, she was feeling that discomfort. And so it really did help with her pain. And it was immense comfort to, anybody who's dealt with this knows. I mean, we just 24/7 care at home, and my kids there, and I was there pretty much all the time. This all happened and got really intense. We were gonna come down in July and do this, and had to postpone it because I just didn't wanna leave at that time. So yes, it did help, quite a bit.
Thank you.
Have you heard much about RSO? The
Rick Sims oil.
It's a very
It's a
concentrated
yeah.
CBD.
No, THC. Very high dose THC.
Very high.
Yeah.
I have a brother that had lung and also liver cancer, was on the liver transplant list at UCLA. And he started doing that on his own, and the doctors were very skeptical. His markers were way high. And a year and a half later, he's cancer-free. And the doctors at UCLA are taking note, and they're gonna do a study on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I can tell you from my conversations and our approach, we're not out there talking to recreational users, right? Which we're not, but we're talking to physicians. We're looking at, both in the US and Canada, getting involved in clinical studies. There's I just had a conversation with the people at Oregon Health Sciences University about a study they'd like to do with us. It's being funded by the state. There's a lot of skepticism, back to the original question, but there's also a lot of curiosity. And I think now that we're getting to the point where this is moving very quickly, it's gonna force two things. It's gonna force the government to somehow come down and decide how to regulate CBD. And there's no question that will happen at some point. And it's also forcing the medical community to have to really look and understand this. So there's a family of 4 physicians, all with the last name Knox, K-N-O-X. And one of those physicians, they're based in Portland. They've been, Rachel Knox was with me in New Orleans, and she's head of the Oregon Cannabis Association. They've been working in this space for about 6 years, and the way she told it to the physicians in New Orleans that were around us from the hospital is, look, your patient who you're treating, if you don't figure out how you want them to get this product from you, they're gonna go get it somewhere else. They're gonna try it. There's enough buzz happening, there's enough information out there that people want to do this. And so I think, similar to your story, it's making physicians in the medical community look at it much more seriously than has ever been done in the past. So that's a great story. I hadn't heard about that. That's really, congratulations on that success. So that was the end of the slides. Thank goodness, right? And again, happy to take more questions, but
question.
I'll turn it over to Dom or
Well,
Curtis, or however you want to take it.
Question for you: does your test give you any suggestion on whether tincture or topical or vape? I don't know if we can say vape anymore, but vapes are made the right way through CBD and terpenes. I know that they're very effective.
No, we don't.
So just get the.
We try and give a little bit of education in terms of there are different delivery methods, but it really comes down to the daily dose. And
Okay.
if you want to, part of it comes out of the survey. If you're, when you have your largest meal and
Okay.
things like that. But no, we don't. We're not trying to push any one delivery method. Although, the one thing that we highly recommend is that, besides the quality of the product you have, that it's gonna be best if you can take it so you know what dose you're getting. So,
Right.
so for example, trying to smoke is not gonna give you a good dose, so.
I just know that certain people, they benefit from the vape because for like anxiety or, people that have panic attacks or anxiety, because it hits the blood-brain barrier much faster than going in through the stomach, through the liver, so.
There's an Israeli company that we're working with that is here in the US right now and looking to move to the US market that has an interesting delivery system that is really sophisticated, really calibrated to give you exactly the doses you need when you need it. And I think that ultimately, 10, 20 years from now, that'll become more the norm. But, it's again.
I mean, it's
not very
going so fast, it's changing so fast with like even nanotechnology and, breaking it from oil to water soluble to get into the delivery system a lot faster. So, I mean, things are happening so fast in this industry. So, like you said, just make sure that you get product from a place that is lab tested. That's the number one, because if it's not lab tested, which is a lot of people out there making products right now, that if you don't know where it's from, make sure you ask for a lab test, because it could say it has 500 milligrams, it could have no milligrams, it could have 200 milligrams, it could have, it could be contaminated, it could be all kinds of different things. You don't want mold and yeast and all the different toxins in there while you're trying to take a nutritional product to help you.
So I see a question in the back, but one of the things is if you get it through a regulated group, like at least in the states I'm aware of, there are no pesticides registered for use on hemp, and most of the CBD only is coming from hemp. So it should be also, if it comes through a state certification lab, it should be pesticide free, and we're starting to see that more and more with products that are directly consumed. So I do a lot of international travel as well, and the states in India, for example, where tea is grown, those entire states are basically banning pesticides because you get the tea leaf and you drink it, and there's a lot of concerns about residue. So not only do you need to look for the quality lab that this is the amount of CBD, but you want to make sure it's come through a lab that has grown and been state certified, because then it's also pesticide free.
But how would you know that? Because, if it's not regulated, they could be lying.
It's regulated by the state. I'm sorry, when I answer your question, so it's regulated by the state, but not federally. So when you ask your question about how is it regulated, that's what's caused some of the slowdown, I think, in California, is that they had to work through some of the regulations. So each state is regulating this differently. But at the federal level, I'll give you an example. If you use fertilizer in a home garden, that's regulated by each state. If you use a pesticide, that's regulated by the EPA, and that's regulated federally. And so this is in that gray area now where it's still being regulated by the states, but eventually it will become regulated federally. I just see that coming. So sorry for the confusion there. There's one question we have to raise patient.
You might have addressed this earlier because I had to work, so I came in a little late. But I know a couple of people that are taking, 3 different people that are taking 3 different CBD products, but all of them claim to have, low or no THC. All 3 of them have had issues of cloudiness of mind and memory. Is that something that's unusual, or is that a common side effect, or has anyone addressed that yet?
So I don't know in that particular case. I don't know that there's I haven't heard that before, that that's a common event. If you've got those 3 people, the only thing I would say is that if you look through some of the physiology of the receptors that CBD interacts with, they do impact some of those types of functions that could affect how you're perceiving pain, how your brain is functioning, and so it may be that the dosing that they're taking isn't right. If they're using certified products, it shouldn't have any pesticide or any residue like that in it, and it should be less than 0.3% THC. So I would, again, if the products are good, I would rule that out. My question would be, have they tried other sources of product to see if taking that same dose but from a different supplier gets rid of that issue? I think there's a lot of variation in the market right now in terms of the quality of the product, and that would be my biggest concern right now.
What about use of CBD topically?
So that those receptors, those catcher's mitts, right, for those different cellular processes exist in your cells of your body, of your muscle, et cetera. And so if you're particularly with pain or you're looking for a really rapid delivery, those topical things, those patches, et cetera, can be really effective. It's a little bit more, I think, a little bit more trial and error in terms of the dosing and how those patches are made, those topicals or those creams, but it will work in the same mechanism because it will work on those same cellular receptors, if that makes sense. They're not, as you saw from that picture of the body, those receptors are throughout your body. They're not just in your brain and your nervous system. So that can be really effective for certain things.
So can you take the formula that's devised by your company and have a topical product made from that?
We don't, you probably could if you go to the right place that would do that. We don't make any CBD products, so.
But you provide like a prescription sort of thing. That
We provide a recommendation, and you could go and say, look at, I would like to find a patch that's 100 milligrams of CBD, and do you have that? How retail you would get that, and what's the variety of patches that are out there? You might have to look a little bit to see who makes that 100 milligram versus 50 milligram, but they do exist in all those different formulas, and there's more coming. So another personal story. My daughter, there's a lot of women in the audience, which cosmetics tends to be more for women than men. I don't know why it's that way. My daughter, who I've just spent a lot of time with, is a brand strategist for skincare for a big company, retail company called Sephora. So she's based in San Francisco. And she and I have been talking about where Sephora is headed with CBD products, and they're just launching their first CBD creams. And you can imagine big companies like this do a lot of vetting. I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time. He's recording me, so I can't say how long because so I don't want to get her in trouble. But I knew that it was on their radar screen, and because she would come and ask me what I knew about CBD and where this field was headed, and so I'm sure there's a whole range of products out there, and they're going to become more and more mainstream as companies like a Sephora that have retails around the world start to take those forward as well. So it's not just the small companies, but the larger companies are beginning to move in that direction.
I didn't get your name, I'm sorry. I want to get your name now again.
Yeah,
She got it.
here you go. Here you are. You can.
Okay.
I go by Rye, which is my middle name, R-Y. So you'll see a D in front of it, but there you go. So just call me Rye. That's a whole nother story. How my parents came up with that, I don't know. You and then you, sorry. Did you have a question?
Yes. And how much is your personalized DNA test kit?
How much is our personalized DNA test? Depends on who's selling it, but our retail price is around, if you go to the website and you buy it individually, our retail price is $189. If you work through a group like Curtis, then there's a substantial discount on that. So it's depends on if you're a one-off just looking around, or you're somebody that we work with like we do here with this group, then it's less than that. And over time, that cost will come down. So just remember the very first human genome sequenced in 2003 cost $100 million and took 15 years. Okay, and the fact that we can do these sorts of things now and that technology, so there's room to see in the future this will become less expensive as well. Oh, sorry, one more here. You had a question, and then we'll go back.
Me?
Yes, you.
I was wondering, like, when you use the topical or whatever and it helps with the pain, is there any proof that some of these topicals are curable items that are causing you the pain, or it's just to relieve the pain?
It's really to relieve the pain. There's not a curative, to my knowledge, there's not a curative effect. To my knowledge, and again, this is based on lots of discussions, and some of them I just had this past week, is that you may take a little bit of time to see that relief. You know, you don't expect to put a patch on and then the next day, you know, you're doing jumping jacks, right? It may be that you need to do that for a little bit of time. That time may be a couple days, a couple weeks, but it has to do with how you're re-educating your physiological pathways, how you're getting them ready, that catcher's mitt ready to receive it. It's not going to be instantaneous, but once you build that relationship between your cellular processes and the use of CBD, it will be long-term in terms of the relief you have, but it won't cure what you have. I'll get back there in a second. We'll kind of work our way back. Go ahead. Yes.
This is a different subject altogether. My dog is on CBD, and he couldn't jump up on the bed. He used to do it all the time. He has arthritis in his back legs. He now can jump up, and he's much better. But if you're a dog lover, you know, maybe it would help.
Yeah, I'm definitely a dog lover. What kind of dog do you have?
This is a Heinz 57 variety.
Yeah.
I got her when she was that big, 8 pounds. Now she's 56.
So I mean, I love dogs. I have an Australian Shepherd that's 5 years old now, and you know, she now earned a new certificate as therapy dog because with my ex-wife's condition and passing, I bring her over all the time. And the best memory I have is she was still in the hospital. Catherine's her name, still in the hospital at the time, and having really problems with all the crummy medicines and food, and couldn't get a bowel movement going. To be honest here, right? And I brought Kelsey, my dog, over, and she was like all happy and licking her, and she jumped into the bed. I just caught me off guard. She landed right on her stomach, and Kelsey goes, "God, that's exactly what I needed." But that's a whole nother area. So I go to our pet store. It's called Healthy Pet, and they have a CBD section in there. And you would not believe how many customers I talk to. I overhear them buying something, and they go, "Well, you know, how much do I give my dog?" type of thing. And so the same genes that we have in our system, your cat and your dog do as well. And so one of the things we're contemplating is, would we try and develop the same test for somebody to give their dog at the pricing we're at now, which is, you know, in the over $100. Somebody may or may not do that, but when you think about how often people will go in and they'll say, "I'm not sure what to use," but maybe sometimes I feel like we spend more on our dogs and cats than
We do.
on ourselves.
We do.
And he said try it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
So after you sign up for your test, what's the turnaround time? When do you get the results?
We say it takes 3 to 5 weeks, but in reality it's about 2 to 3 weeks. And the results come as I said, as a report, that's a PDF. And we have a contact number if you have questions about it, or either through email or phone. We can help explain things to you if you need that done as well. So we say 3 to 5 weeks just to give us a little bit of leeway, but our turnaround time is more 2 to 3 weeks right now. That's that 2 to 3 weeks is after we receive your sample back. So it comes, you know, in a, the way the kit is that you spit in the tube, you cap the tube, you need to just invert the tube, and that preserves the DNA. But then the return packaging's all there and prepaid and everything. You just put it back in the box and put it in the mail. And then we're kind of beholden on the US mail system for, you know, it takes 3 to 5 days. But we do all of our testing. So we have a partnership with a DNA testing company that's pretty innovative in the San Francisco area called Centrillion. And they have, and the testing lab that we use and the people we work very closely with are also in Portland, Oregon. They had set up, this person by the name of John Chang is the director of this lab. He had set up the Oregon Health Sciences University genomics and DNA testing facility, and then that university wanted to privatize it. So he spun it out and now has it as a company that initially focused on testing for rare genetic diseases of the eye. And so the methodology they use is really precise. They're CLIA certified, they're HIPAA compliant. I mean, this is a really high-end medical lab. And so it needs to get back to Portland, Oregon, where we do that sequencing and then get the report back to you. So it's a matter of a couple of days.
So,
Oh, sorry, I saw one more back here. Go ahead.
So you had referenced that the CBD oils need to be 0.3 or less of THC. But what I want to know then is if you partake in a THC product along with the CBD dosage you recommend, is there a negative effect to the CBD? It's okay, or you're just trying to keep the trial of CBD clean?
No. Let me see if I understand your question. So I'll try and answer it, and if I don't answer it right, tell me I didn't understand. Again, the CBD and THC work through different cellular processes, different receptors. Okay? What you risk is that if you activate one of those, let's just imagine you've got headphones on and you've got the bass in this ear really loud and the treble in this ear really loud. They could interfere with one another that way. So if you elevate your THC too much relative to the sort of ratio that's recommended, then you can potentially get in the way of the positive effects of the CBD because you're activating this whole other part of your physiology.
So it can negatively
So
affect.
it could. I don't know if it will. Depends on how much THC but the beauty of this test is that a number of these genes that we test for are how you perceive and how you perceive THC and how you degrade THC. So you'll know, are you a slow metabolizer of THC? I better have less because it's going to persist in my system longer, type of thing. So you can actually look at this THC CBD information separately and decide if you want to take that experiment.
Quick question. Confidentiality. Confidentiality.
Right. So with your DNA?
Yes.
Yeah. So the gentleman here in the blue shirt who ran these slides is our chief legal officer. He was a partner at a law firm, Stoll Reeves. I've worked with him for many years. What you'll have a privacy statement that you need to review and sign. Confidentiality is there in place only between you and the company. You have the right at any time to request not only that your data be deleted from our system, but you also have the right to request that your DNA be destroyed. So what we do is we get enough saliva that we make enough DNA that if there are breakthroughs in the future, we want to run that test and give that to you again, right? Give you that additional information. But if a month from now you say, look, I want nothing to do with this, I don't even want you to have my DNA, then we destroy that DNA. We also purge everything from the data. So you have that right because basically it's our philosophy, but I think it's also the law. You own that. That's your information, and that DNA belongs to you. Does that make sense? Now, one other place where people are getting a little interested about confidentiality is there've been a couple of situations where there's been, oops, I'm gonna miss somebody here. Did you have
What's your question?
Yeah, so if you just take the CBD, you have to worry about drug testing. Does anything show up if you have a drug test?
No.
Okay.
If you just
Even
take
with
the
small
CBD,
amount,
it's only the THC.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, that was a good question. You know, if the only group that can access your DNA outside of that legally are the police. And the police can only request that information in the case of a murder. And you have the right now, this wasn't true a few years ago, but because of some befuddlement that the Utah police did, where there wasn't a murder, and they requested the information and they got it, the law's changed now where you have to opt in. If you opt out, that your DNA, that your information can be shared with anybody, including the police, then we can't share it with the police if they ever were to come to us.
That is an option.
Yeah, so that is an option. So you can opt out so that it can't be shared with anybody. Actually, the way we do it is you opt in. So we automatically assume that you don't want your DNA or your information shared with anybody, but we give you the option to opt in. And in that case, the only outside group that can ask that information is the police, and the police can only ask for it in the case of a murder investigation.
And under subpoena.
And what?
And under subpoena.
And under subpoena, according to our lawyer. So they'd have to subpoena us, it'd have to be a murder, and you would have had to have opted in to say we can share your data before we would share that even with the police. And so, yeah, it's your personal information, you control it, it's your DNA, you control it. We destroy it if you don't want us to have it.
So your test is from saliva?
Yes.
Okay, how is that different when you have genetic testing that's from your blood?
So there are several ways of doing of getting material for genetic tests. The most economical but the least reliable is to do a cheek swab. The most economical and highly reliable is saliva. The blood tests are usually only done under the supervision of a physician, and they're done by for a medical reason, and that's where they want to have really clear chain of custody. So they want to know that somebody drew the blood, put it in the tube, it's yours, they got it. For all I know, you could have your dog saliva in the tube and process it for years, right? So we're trusting you that you're giving us your saliva. But the saliva method is, and there are publications on this in Proceedings of National Academy of Science, et cetera, that it's the most reliable source of getting the quantity and quality of DNA, because the method we use is called DNA sequencing. There's another method called a SNP, remember single nucleotide polymorphism, that great little word? They call it a SNP chip, and they just do it on a little glass slide, and it's not as reliable as sequencing. So we want the highest quality DNA because we want to give you the most accurate results, so we do it by DNA sequencing. But the blood aspect of this is no different than the saliva aspect, except the chain of custody. We're trusting you that you followed our instructions and your saliva is in the tube, whereas your blood draw would be done by a physician or a physician assistant, and then they know where that went. But the quality of the DNA or the information you can get is no different than from a blood sample or a saliva sample. The DNA is the same. If you're testing for proteins and things, you'd find differences between blood and saliva, but the DNA will be the same.
Why is the saliva more accurate than, say, the cheek swab?
The saliva is more accurate because you get a larger quantity, and the fibers and the things that they use in those swabbing can interfere with how you make the DNA. To make DNA, you have to get rid of all the protein, and you do an extraction and other things like that, and the fibers from the cheek swab can cause a problem, and you just don't get the same quantity. And you can get, we call them spit kits, inside, you get big kids that collect a mil or 2 mils. We collect 2 mils because we want to get a really high quality DNA, and we want to have it to be able to use to give you data in the future. And so once the DNA is made, it's kept in our partner lab in Hillsborough in a -80°C freezer, and DNA, in my opinion, DNA is a little bit like diamonds. It lasts forever. You know, they're sequencing DNA from mammoths and organisms that are millions of years old, so we just keep it stored in the freezer, and then if we have a new test or something we can do, we can just pull that DNA out, sequence it for that new gene or those new genes, and then give you that information. That was a lot of really excellent questions. I should have had only 3 slides and just listened to you the whole time. It was great to meet everybody, and thank you so much for coming out. Was there one more? John's pointing at something.
Kids.
Pardon?
No, and just preparing kids if people are interested. If people are interested, we're preparing kids.
Oh,
Preparing kids.
I'm going to turn it over to Curtis, and then we'll be around for a bit if you want to chat or anything. That'd be great. But Curtis, thanks a lot for having us.
Thank you.